Hey guys, what is going on? My name is Luke and this is Divine Photography. So today we're going to be looking at a few photos taken of this BMW M4 taken by Sebastian Witt, and I'll pop his Instagram tag up on the screen. Give him a follow. He's a really great creator and photographer. So today we're going to be editing these photos and we're going to see if we can get our photos just a little bit better than his, if not just as good. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure your basic color and vibrance and saturation is all how you want it. So for this photo, it was really well taken. You can blur the license plate out if you want. On some photos, it's really up to you. The exposure, we're going to bring down just a tad bit, just to make sure everything is decently exposed and not too blown out like the buildings in the background. Your contrast is optional, it's however you want it, so you can bring it to your preference. From here, we're gonna bring it down just a little bit like the exposure. And then for highlights and these four, we're going to hold Alt or Control on Mac, I believe. And this is where you can see, so we can move anything here and nothing will be blown out in this image. So we're gonna bring that how we like it. So we're gonna bring the highlights down to make the sky more visible and the car not so bright on the highlights. And then shadows, we are also free with those. So we're going to bring the shadows up a tad bit. That way we get the rims exposed a little bit better. You'll see that on the highlights and shadows on other photos that aren't perfectly exposed, but you just bring that down or up to your liking. So you want nothing to really be too blown out or nothing to be too dark. So like in the rim here, it doesn't matter if it's too dark or not because not many people look right at the rim. So we can bring that down just a smidge, -14 on that. In this photo, we can press the Y and Y, and this is the before and after. And so far, it's looking really, really good. The yellow is very yellow. The colors are better. The sky's not so bright. It's looking better. So we're going to bring the texture down about 4, just to bring the texture down in the background, in the foreground, and some of the sky, because the sky doesn't need to be super HDR-like. We're going to leave the clarity and dehaze because this photo doesn't need it. The vibrance, I don't recommend you touch unless you're shooting for, let's say, a dealership and you want to just bring all of the colors out, but don't drown the car out. On this photo, we're going to bring down the saturation and bring back the specific colors we want. So we're going to bring it down 40. Now for the tone curve, I don't really mess with it too much because I like to handpick everything I do on my photos, and the tone curve is more so a waste of time. Like, you can do it. So this photo, you would bring that down, and the most common one is the S. So you bring out the shadows and you darken the highlights and you darken some of the dark spots like that. But we're just going to leave this all like it is. Now for the HSL and the color palette, we're not going to mess with the hue until we bring out the saturation and luminance, and if something feels off, then we can mess with the hue and make it a little bit more to your liking. So for this, we're going to bring out some of the red. We don't need it all the way out because it's only affecting back here, as you can see. So we're going to bring it up just a little bit, say 40, 38, something around there. The orange, now the building in the background is very orange if we bring that all the way up, and this is more so a pink. So we are going to bring it up just enough to make sure there's color in the back, and this is bright enough for you to see it but not distract your eyes from the car just yet. Now for the yellow, you don't really want to bring it all the way up because you can focus more on that with masking. So we're going to bring it up enough to where we can see the colors. So more so 60, 67. And then the greens, those are a pretty big part, but you don't want a whole lot of green on the ground unless that's the look you're going for. Photography is subjective, it's an art form, so you do what you want with that. I'm going to bring it up to about 30 because it brings out just enough color in the back here. Some is darker, some is lighter. It's a good balance. Now aqua. I know this photo has some blue or aqua here, but it's mostly blue. So for aqua, if there's not something very aqua colored in the back, I suggest you bring that down because of the windshield. It adds a aqua and that just never looks good for a photo. So the blue, you can bring that up. As you can see, it's not messing with the windshield or the side windows. So this is more for the color in the back. We can bring that up, give it something to pop, maybe a little bit down, say 45, that looks good. It's a good color combination, and you still have all the details. For purple, there's a little bit, so we're going to bring that to 22. Magenta, there's a few parts, but it does need it, so we're going to bring that to about 75 for the circles to pop here and the outlines. Now luminance, we don't really need to mess with that on this photo. There's no reason to unless I want to make the background pop. We're going to leave all of that for now. For color grading, for midtones, I like to do 220 and then take the saturation to 10 and blending to 80. And you can mess with this. We're going to make this a more cool color picture, so the yellow on the car pops a little bit better. The midtones, we're going to just bring the luminance up and down for some of the midtones, and that'll also stay at blending. And for highlights, we're going to take that at 35 hue, and saturation is at 12. Now you can mess with the balance here even more so. So we're going to bring that down to minus 47. And that gives this foreground a lot more bluish feel. For the masking, if you hold Alt or Control on Mac, you can move this slider, and what you want is, instead of just a pure white, all of it being sharpened, you want to bring this down to the car and the details that you want. So I want the grille to be seen and sharpened a little bit, so we're going to bring that just enough. And we can bring that sharpening up if we would like, just keep it to a minimum. Now for lens correction, I suggest you do this with every photo that you take. Now for this one, it was taken with a Sony FE 35mm 1.8, which is a great lens, I'm sure. Now we're not going to mess with effects or transformation or calibration. It's not needed in this photo or right now. So this is the before and after so far. There's a little bit more depth. The yellow isn't popping as much. The background still looks pretty good, not super bright. The buildings are a little bit darker, and it's just looking a little bit better. There's more contrast on the ground. So now we're going to take it to the masking, and we're going to select subject. Once we select our subject, we're actually going to subtract some of the background that it has selected on its own, and we're going to just make sure that's the car. Cool. And we're going to bring the car a little bit up, not too much, 0.50, so 0.5%. And we're going to bring the contrast up to make the blacks blacker instead of more of a white. We're going to bring the contrast up to about 45. The highlights we're going to bring all the way down because there's already a lot. The shadows we can bring up a tad bit to about 13. The whites we're going to bring down a little bit, minus 13. And the blacks we're going to bring down, minus 4. Then we're going to bring some of the saturation back in the car, which makes it really pop. Just like that. And the sharpness in the entire car we can bring up or down. So we're going to bring the entire car up about 11. And then the texture I'm going to do +4 because it's not too much. It's a pretty good balance. Clarity you can mess with on your own. We're going to bring that up about 15% or 15 and leave the dehaze. Now we're going to create a new mask, and this is going to be a linear gradient, and we're going to bring that from about here up onto where it's touching the wall and subtract our subject, which is the car. Once that's masked out, we can bring the exposure down and bump the contrast. So something like that looks really well. It doesn't look fake, and it looks good enough where the blacks are popping a little bit more. We can bring the blacks down if we want. It's a pretty good balance right there though. And then we're going to select the sky. And it did a pretty good job with doing that. We can go in here and get rid of just this part of the building that it has selected. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's got to be just good enough. And we can bring that down. I like to bump the contrast. That way you can see the clouds. And you can bring the texture down or the clarity down, whatever you like to do with them. There we go. Now it gives it more of a moody look. It looks more dark at the bottom and the top. Now we're going to add a linear gradient from the brighter side of the photo, which would be the right side, because if you look at the sky, it's darker, and then dark at the top and brighter at the right. So we're going to bring one of these in, make it really wide. That way there's a lot bigger of a gradient here instead of just super dark or super bright. So we're going to bring that in to where it's about touching the car. I'm going to bring the exposure up a little bit. That way it looks like artificial lighting, and it's just lighting this part of the car, and it matches the highlights on the vehicle. So if we go to the before and after, you can see the yellow is a whole lot better looking. The background isn't super bright like it was before. It's a little bit out of focus as well. If you look at the foreground, it's a lot more contrast like. It has a dark and linear gradients out to a lighter, which is about where the car is. We brought the car out with more yellow, more contrast. It looks a little bit brighter, and it looks more sharp. Now you can go in here with a brush and brush some parts in if you would want to. And just bring the exposure down just a little bit. So we're going to make another brush, and we're going to go in here and see what we can do for the overexposed on the windows and a little bit back here. So bring the exposure down, make sure it doesn't look super unrealistic, and it looks much better on the windows there, so it doesn't look too fake or super bright. So then what we're going to do, just to make this photo look absolutely perfect, is go and brush again, take it to 100%, and we're going to brush the roof in, the parts that are super bright. Now some people like the look of very exposed, but for this photo in particular, we're going to make it perfectly exposed. Now if you'd like, you can bring a linear gradient from the top down and just darken some more of the clouds, so it gives it more of a moody look and feel to this photo. So that's the before. It's super blown out in a few places, and this is the after. it has less color on the wall, but more on the subject. And it looks just more professional and more clean. You can also go the other route with taking this up and making this brighter. And this has turned out really good for a few of my shots, like the Mercedes-Benz GT 63S shoot I have done for Mercedes-Benz, and a few other photos that I have taken. Now you can go to cropping, and if you're posting this on Instagram, you can do 4x5. And if you want it side to side, you can press X and make it side to side in that fashion. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring this up and just position our car and our frame how we want this. So something like this looks rather well. You can see on the left side here. So we're going to press done with that, make sure that looks good to us. And then we're going to go back to cropping and auto crop it, which does a pretty fantastic job every time. So this is the end photo. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts, and send me photos on Instagram, and I will do a editing my subscribers and followers photos. Have a good one.